Hey everyone. So I am just sitting here potting up some cuttings that I am going to attempt to overwinter. And I thought it might be a good opportunity to have a conversation about how I'm going to overwinter some plants this year. To be honest, I am always reluctant to take on too many plants in winter. If you followed me before, you know that I don't really love having house plants. I have a couple of house plants that I love, but at some point they become a bit of a burden. Bringing in plants for winter that need care over winter is tough for me because I just generally don't do very well taking care of plants inside. And we have not a lot of spots that are good for growing plants in windows. Now, for whatever reason, I find myself this year bringing in more plants than I've ever brought in before. And although it's not time to bring in many of those things yet, it might be getting to be that time where you are. So I thought it might be helpful to just kind of walk around and tell you a little bit about how I'm going to care for some of these plants that I'm going to bring in over winter. So first of all, I just want to say this book has been extremely helpful. This is a new book by Marianne Wilburn, and it's all about taking care of tropical plants and how to use them in your garden. I'll put a link to it below, but she's got a big section in here on how to overwinter things, and it's a great reference guide. So it's one of those books that I see myself using a lot. So one of the things I'm doing is this is the silver shield plectranthus that I have all over the garden. I've talked about it a lot this year, and I had a really hard time finding it this year. It is extremely easy to take cuttings from this. So my plan is to try to keep maybe 2 of these going over winter, and then I'll just take cuttings from it maybe like, late winter, and try to keep and just do my stock that way. So just take it all from cuttings. So as you can see, I've been took some cuttings. This is probably 2 weeks ago, and I'm rooting these in water. Now, Plectranthus is so easy that you don't even, I often just plunk it in the ground without doing the water thing, but I thought it might be fun to do both and see how it works. So, these all have roots forming on them. I think hopefully you can see the roots on those. And I'm just going to plunk these in to this pot. Now, I should probably pre-moisten the soil. I'll just do it with this water. This is just regular potting mix. This is the Organics Mechanics container blend that I've been using for everything. Ooh, and now it's draining onto my book. Good thinking. Oh, that's cold. Whoops. So I'm just going to stick these all in. And these are all going to go in the same pot because the goal here isn't to have these really flourish and grow huge. The goal here is to just keep these happy enough that I can use these as mother plants from which to take cuttings from later in the year, because I don't really want big plants to have to care for. So this smaller sort of mother plant. You might recall I did this last year with some sedum, and showed you how I do that. It's the same concept. It's just keep this mother plant alive and then use it later on in the year to create plants from, so that you can build up your stock for your garden. Now I'm going to leave this outside for right now because these plants are used to being out here, but I'll bring them in soon. And what I'm going to do is, since I have grow lights set up in the basement for seed starting, I'm going to actually use some of those to overwinter a lot of these plants because, like I said, I just don't have enough light in my house for most of these things to get enough light. And honestly, they're not going to be that pretty. So I don't really want to look at things that aren't pretty. Okay, there we go. So those are potted up. I'm going to show you just quickly how we take cuttings of this, and then I'm just going to pot those up too because we will see how that one compares to this one. Now I have Plectranthus growing in so many places that I've got lots of places I can choose from. So when you're taking material for stem cuttings, you want to look for something that doesn't have a flower on it. And I actually cut that a little deep, but I'm just going to cut that right there. And then you're going to want to actually remove some of these bigger leaves. So we don't need this leaf. because what you really want to do is just get some growth coming from here. You don't need big leaves for this. So I'll take another one here. Could actually cut it right there. Take off the big leaves here. Now, in some cases, you might even be wanting to reduce the amount of leaf that's there so that you reduce the transpiration. And so you can actually just cut the leaves in half. Remember, it doesn't matter what it looks like. You're just trying to get new plants from this. So I just reuse nursery pots that I save for this stuff. Now, sometimes you might think about doing a little bit of root hormone on there. These are so easy that I don't even bother with that. So I'm just going to poke a hole with my finger and stick it in there and just sort of firm it in. Sometimes people say that when you do these cuttings, you should put them right along the edge of the pot because it helps them create roots a little bit easier. You can certainly do that. And I'm just going to fill this pot up with a whole bunch of these. And we will check back on these and see how this does compared to the ones that I rooted in water. Other plants that this might work with are basil, anything that roots very easily from stem cuttings. There are other things you can do, of course, from stem cuttings, but the ones that I'm sort of talking about today are these really easy ones that just kind of want to grow because I'm all for foolproof. Okay, so here's my little pot of cuttings. You know the drill on these things. Keep them evenly moist, especially when they're trying to start roots. Give them a bit of light. Don't fry them too much. It's pretty much like growing any other plant. Now, my theory on overwintering plants is that I'm interested in doing it when, like in the case of this, it's difficult for me to find, or I need or want a whole bunch of that plant the next year, and I want to plan on doing some propagation for the season. Or it's very expensive. If it's a very expensive plant, I think sometimes it's worth doing. Or if it's extremely hard to grow. So I think all the plants that I'm going to show you here fall under those categories. The other things are things that you just really love that plant, like your house plants. You bring your house plants in if you've brought them out for summer, which are the only way mine stay alive. Because you like those plants. So if they're not going to survive and you need to do something with them. But the hard to grow part, or that you don't want to start over because it takes them a while to size up. So let's walk around, take a look at some of the other plants that are going to be coming in for winter and how I'm going to deal with those. So here are two plants that I would like to bring in. Here's my kumquat, which I've not had a lot of success with this year, but obviously that needs to come in. It's definitely not hardy. And this is that Senecio skyscraper that I planted up earlier this year. Both of those are essentially going to get treated like houseplants, although I will put these under grow lights in the basement. So I'll bring them in soon so that the temperature differentiation isn't too much for them to overcome and just get them going. Nothing will change with them. Except, I will try to keep an eye out for bugs. That's always an issue with houseplants. So those two are pretty simple, essentially what you do with your houseplants. I'm over here. So this Coffee Cups colocasia is amazing. And you better bet I'm going to overwinter this plant. Very cool. So you guys might remember that I had actually planted this in a nursery pot in spring and then sunk the whole pot in here for many reasons, including that this plant wants a lot more water than what the other plants in this planter did. It worked out great. I think you can see that it was a success. If I have one little criticism of this particular container, it's that it gets lost a little bit with the evergreens behind me. The color is a little hard to see. So I think I should have done more light colored plants in the base here. I think that's pretty minor, but I think you can see that this all worked out fine. Now, since this guy is already in a pot, this was part of the thing. I did sort of plan this too. It's really easy. I can just lift that pot out, wash it off. I will cut back many of these. There's no way it's going to be able to support these leaves in there, so I'll cut back probably the majority of the big leaves and just leave the small leaves on it. Take this down in the basement, and it's going to sort of be a houseplant, but also I'm going to allow it to be like in a semi-dormant state, which is to say not actively growing, just kind of sort of surviving. And then we'll sort of bring it out of that semi-dormant space, in very late winter or probably early spring. Now, sometimes with colocasia, you can actually dig the, I think they're corms technically. You can dig those out and dry store that. My understanding is that coffee cups doesn't form big corms, so that's why I'm going to try the pot. But you could certainly do that with many types of elephant ears, and possibly even this one. But this one I'm going to overwinter in this pot. So this year I planted the Propagating cannas straight into the ground, and I love how it turned out. So these will get dug and stored as bulbs, kind of in a similar way to what you would do with dahlias, although I don't pack these. I just kind of put these in a paper bag. These guys I will wait, but I will wait to dig these until after a frost. I will let these leaves die back, and then I'll dig them because I want these to be dormant when I dig them and store them. And then in late winter, I'll pot these up inside, which is what I did this year, pot these up inside and get them started before I bring them out into the garden. Now I hope you can see what's dangling above me here. This is purple belvine. We've talked about it a ton on this channel because I have a bit of an obsession with it. And you can see that the two on the deck here are doing really well. So they have grown up the strings. Here, I put another string and they've gone all the way across the top of the pergola here, and it is just absolutely loaded with flowers. So, as you know, I've talked about how it can be a really difficult plant to grow. I had no luck with my seeds this year. I actually ended up ordering these as plants from Select Seeds, which is also where I bought the seeds from. But that was not my intention. I just had zero luck with getting seeds to germinate this year. I've talked to so many of you who have had problems growing this plant. Since I have two very happy plants here, I did a little research on how one would overwinter this, and it turns out that this is actually a tender perennial, meaning that it's not an annual. It will keep growing as long as it doesn't get too cold. So what I'm going to do is dig each of these up out of this pot, repot them with fresh potting mix into probably gallon-sized containers, and cut it off probably with about 3 inches of growth, and that's it. I'm gonna bring these in and cross my fingers, keep these under lights and keep them sort of, again, this is sort of a slow growth phase, a semi-dormant kind of phase, because hopefully then I won't have to go through all that trouble trying to grow these that I did last year. But this has obviously worked out really well. Oh, and as far as timing on this one, well, it looks way too pretty for me to even think about messing with it right now. I will wait a little bit. I'll keep an eye out. It's protected up here by the house, so I'm not too worried about something sneaking in there and ruining this. But it looks too good right now for me to possibly think about moving this right now. Since we're already up here on the deck, we'll just take a stop here by the tropical hibiscus, which has actually been flowering like crazy lately. I've had this tropical hibiscus for maybe 3 or 4 years. I bring it inside every year. I've always put it in a window until last year. I put it in the basement under grow lights. It did much better there. I don't think it gets enough light. I've also had huge issues with aphids on this plant. Almost every time I bring this plant inside, it just gets covered in aphids. So what I'm doing with all my house plants right now, first of all, is I'm starting to spray them, wash off the leaves, trying to keep any bugs at bay. I will probably use an insecticidal soap on everything before I bring it in. Maybe I should probably start doing that now. But I will also cut this back quite a bit. I will probably cut all of these down by at least half, if not more, just so that it doesn't have to support so much foliage, and just kind of limp it along. But you can see it's been doing just fine. It looks good now. It's just that it's tough in winter for it. So by cutting that growth back a little bit, that gives it less work to have to do, and I just have to be really careful about the aphids on this one because for whatever reason they go after this one big time. So I can't remember if I've actually even talked to you about these two pots in the vegetable garden and what happened with them this year. You might recall I had some beautiful David Austin roses growing there, Fighting Temeraire, possibly my favorite David Austin I've ever seen, even though it doesn't really look like your typical David Austin. They came through the winter great, but I managed to not do them any favors in spring. So I would have had to limp them along. I didn't feel like doing that. So I ran to the nursery and found 2 abutilons on sale for half price. But half price on these babies was still almost $25. I also decided I love the way that these look, so I would like to repeat this next year. But I don't really want to spend $50 per plant for something that I'm going to throw away every year. So I'm going to take a shot at overwintering these. I say take a shot because these are known to be difficult to overwinter. They want a lot of humidity. They're just not well suited, generally speaking, to bringing indoors. So this one of all of them will be probably the biggest chance I take. And if I lose them, I won't feel bad about it because I will have given it a try. This will be as simple as digging these babies up. These are on standard, so this will be as simple as digging these guys up, bringing them inside, and hoping I can keep them moist and happy in there if I lose them. So my perspective on that abutilon is pretty much my perspective on all these plants. There will be losses. Not everything will make it through, and that's okay. There are always more plants to buy. You can find them somewhere else. Almost nothing is irreplaceable. So I'm gonna do my best, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, try again next year, or don't. Find something else to try. Timing is really hard with talking about overwintering because it depends so much on where you live, but I did want to do this video now because I know many of you are ahead of me in terms of temperatures. We're coming off a cold week, but going into this week, we're still high 70s during the day and high 50s at night. So we've got plenty of time. And in fact, my falls are warmer than most people's in my zone. So I tend to have a little bit of extra time to do these things, which is great since I'm a big procrastinator. But that's my overwintering plan. I hope this was helpful. I think it would be really cool if you could tell me in the comments what plants you go to a lot of extremes to overwinter, because it's always interesting to see, like, what is that plant that people will put the extra time and effort into hanging on to because they love it so much. I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys have a great day in your garden, and we'll see you soon.